In the small town of Maplewood, Minnesota, in 2018, on Lakeview Road, stood the neat two-story home of the Miller family. The neighborhood was known for its quiet, manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. The Millers seemed like a model family. Linda Miller, 42, worked as a manager at a local insurance company, and her son Daniel, 18, had just graduated from high school and was preparing to go to college. Linda's husband, Robert, an engineer, was often away on business trips, leaving his wife and son alone. Neighbors described Linda as a friendly woman who always hosted barbecues in the backyard, and Daniel as a polite but reserved teenager who loved video games and books. But behind this facade of well-being were problems. Linda and Robert were rarely seen together in public, and their marriage, according to close friends, was already on the rocks. Robert spent months in other states working on projects and was barely involved in the family's life. Linda, left alone, focused all her attention on Daniel. She helped him with his homework, took him to sports clubs, and often told her friends that her son was her main support. Daniel, in turn, was attached to his mother, but, as his school friends later noted, sometimes seemed depressed, as if he was carrying a heavy burden. In 2017, when Daniel turned 17, things started to change in the family. Linda started taking more days off, spending time at home with her son. Neighbors noticed that she was buying Daniel expensive gifts, a new laptop, a games console, fashionable clothes. Some saw it as an attempt to compensate for his father's absence, but others, including Marge's neighbor Kelly, noticed oddities. Linda and Daniel would often go away for the weekend without telling them where. Marge once saw Linda hugging her son in the garden, which seemed too intimate for a mother and a teenager. She dismissed it, thinking she was imagining it. Daniel's teachers at school also began to notice the changes. His grades, usually high, began to slip. His literature teacher, Ms. Harris, noted that Daniel began to withdraw from his classmates and often seemed distracted. When asked if everything was okay, he was evasive, but once mentioned that things were difficult at home. No one dug deeper, assuming that these were the usual teenage problems. The Millers' financial situation also raised questions. Linda began withdrawing money from her accounts more frequently, and Robert, according to bank statements, was transferring large sums to her without asking questions. This money, as it later turned out, was spent on trips, gifts, and other expenses related to Daniel. No one in the circle suspected that a story was unfolding in the house on Lakeview Road that would soon shake the entire city. In the small town of Maplewood, Minnesota, in 2018, on Lakeview Road, stood the neat two-story home of the Miller family. The neighborhood was known for its quiet, manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. The Millers seemed like a model family. Linda Miller, 42, worked as a manager at a local insurance company, and her son Daniel, 18, had just graduated from high school and was preparing to go to college. Linda's husband, Robert, an engineer, was often away on business trips, leaving his wife and son alone. Neighbors described Linda as a friendly woman who always hosted barbecues in the backyard, and Daniel as a polite but reserved teenager who loved video games and books. But behind this facade of well-being were problems. Linda and Robert were rarely seen together in public, and their marriage, according to close friends, was already on the rocks. Robert spent months in other states working on projects and was barely involved in the family's life. Linda, left alone, focused all her attention on Daniel. She helped him with his homework, took him to sports clubs, and often told her friends that her son was her main support. Daniel, in turn, was attached to his mother, but, as his school friends later noted, sometimes seemed depressed, as if he was carrying a heavy burden. In 2017, when Daniel turned 17, things started to change in the family. Linda started taking more days off, spending time at home with her son. Neighbors noticed that she was buying Daniel expensive gifts, a new laptop, a games console, fashionable clothes. Some saw it as an attempt to compensate for his father's absence, but others, including Marge's neighbor Kelly, noticed oddities. Linda and Daniel would often go away for the weekend without telling them where. Marge once saw Linda hugging her son in the garden, which seemed too intimate for a mother and a teenager. She dismissed it, thinking she was imagining it. Daniel's teachers at school also began to notice the changes. His grades, usually high, began to slip. His literature teacher, Ms. Harris, noted that Daniel began to withdraw from his classmates and often seemed distracted. When asked if everything was okay, he was evasive, but once mentioned that things were difficult at home. No one dug deeper, assuming that these were the usual teenage problems. The Millers' financial situation also raised questions. Linda began withdrawing money from her accounts more frequently, and Robert, according to bank statements, was transferring large sums to her without asking questions. This money, as it later turned out, was spent on trips, gifts, and other expenses related to Daniel. No one in the circle suspected that a story was unfolding in the house on Lakeview Road that would soon shake the entire city. In the spring of 2018, events began to unfold in the Miller home on Lakeview Road in Maplewood, Minnesota, that none of the neighbors could have predicted. Linda Miller, a 42-year-old single mother without a husband, and her 18-year-old son, Daniel, were spending more and more time together. Their closeness, which seemed like a motherly gesture to others, was hiding a dark secret. Linda and Daniel's secret relationship had begun quietly, but quickly blossomed into a connection that would change their lives forever. It all began in late 2017, when Daniel, then 17, was going through a tough time in high school. His father, Robert, was largely absent, and the pressures of senior year and college choices added to the stress. Linda, feeling lonely in her marriage, began to seek solace in her son. Their evenings spent watching movies or chatting over dinner became increasingly intimate. According to Linda's diary, later seized by police, she wrote that Daniel understood me better than anyone. These entries, dated December 2017, were the first hints of her growing emotional dependence on her son. By early 2018, the relationship had grown beyond affection. Linda and Daniel began spending nights in the same room, which Marge's neighbor Kelly says she once spotted through the window. Marge would see the light on in Linda's bedroom late at night, and Daniel would enter with a pillow. She didn't report it, deciding it was none of her business. At the same time, Linda became even more generous with her son. Bank statements showed that she spent more than $5,000 on trips to nearby cities, where she and Daniel stayed in hotels. These trips were disguised as family vacations, but Robert, who was on a business trip in Texas, suspected nothing. Daniel's friends at school noticed that he had become even more withdrawn. His best friend, Ethan Pierce, later told police that Daniel had stopped sharing details about his life. When asked why he missed parties, Daniel would say he had to be home with my mom. Ethan recalled that Daniel once mentioned feeling trapped, but did not explain what he meant. Teachers also noted that Daniel had become nervous and often missed classes, citing family circumstances. Linda, for her part, became increasingly secretive. She stopped inviting friends over for coffee as she had in the past and avoided talking about her personal life. Her co-worker, Sarah Wilson, noticed that Linda frequently checked her phone and smiled when reading texts that were supposedly from Daniel. In March 2018, Linda took 2 weeks off work, telling her that she needed to take care of family matters. In reality, she and Daniel retreated to a small cottage in Wisconsin, where, according to her diary entries, their relationship became physical. No one around them knew the whole truth. Neighbors saw only the perfect family, and colleagues and friends saw only a caring mother and her growing son. However, this relationship, which began as an attempt to fill an emotional void, had already begun to destroy them both. Linda, absorbed in her feelings, did not notice how her actions affected Daniel's psyche, and he, confused in his own emotions, did not yet realize what this secret would lead to. By the summer of 2018, at the Miller home on Lakeview Road in Maplewood, Minnesota, the relationship between Linda Miller and her 18-year-old son, Daniel, had reached a point where their secret affair was beginning to destroy the young man's psyche. What had begun as emotional intimacy had turned into a heavy psychological burden for Daniel, who found himself caught between guilt, fear of exposure, and pressure from a mother who seemed unaware of the implications of their relationship. Daniel, a recent high school graduate, should have been preparing for college, but his mind was elsewhere. According to notes from a school psychologist he met with in April 2018, he complained of insomnia and constant anxiety. When asked about the reasons, he was evasive, saying only that things are tough at home. The psychologist, Dr. Allison Brown, noted that Daniel seemed depressed and avoided eye contact. She offered him regular sessions, but he declined, saying he could handle it on his own. At home, the situation worsened. Linda, increasingly introverted, became demanding. According to her diary, later seized by police, she wrote that Daniel was her only joy and that she could not imagine life without him. The entries, dated June 2018, showed that Linda was oblivious to her son's growing discomfort. She continued to organize trips together and buy him gifts, but Daniel was now less enthusiastic about them. Marge's neighbor Kelly recalled seeing Daniel in the yard, sitting silently on the porch, staring into space while Linda called him inside. Daniel's friends also noticed changes. His friend Ethan Pierce told police that in May 2018, Daniel stopped responding to texts and avoided hanging out. On the rare outings he took, he seemed distracted and checked his phone frequently, as if he was worried about missing a call. Ethan once asked if his problems were related to his mother, but Daniel abruptly ended the conversation, telling him to stay out of it. It was one of the last times they spoke. In July 2018, tensions reached a boiling point. Linda began talking about the future, hinting that she and Daniel might leave Maplewood and start a new life. These conversations frightened Daniel. According to his search history, later recovered by police, he searched for information on incest laws in Minnesota and teen counseling. These late-night searches showed that Daniel was beginning to see the illegality and immorality of their relationship, but he didn't know how to get out of the situation without destroying his family. Daniel's father, Robert, was still away on business and unsuspecting. His rare calls home were brief, and Linda assured him that everything was fine. Financial reports showed that she continued to spend large sums on trips and gifts for Daniel, further isolating him from the outside world. Linda's colleagues at work noticed that she had become absent-minded and often took time off, citing personal matters. Daniel, trapped in this vicious circle, began to show signs of depression. His high school coach, Mr. Lewis, recalled that Daniel stopped attending track practice, although he had previously been an active participant. When asked about the reasons, he said that he couldn't concentrate. No one around him associated these changes with anything serious, considering them typical for a teenager. However, a conflict was growing inside Daniel that would soon lead to irreversible consequences. The morning of August 15, 2018, began like any other day at the Miller home on Lakeview Road in Maplewood, Minnesota. Linda Miller, 42, was making breakfast while her 18-year-old son Daniel sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. Neighbors later recalled that they noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The windows of the house were open, and the smell of coffee wafted from the kitchen. But by evening, the house would become the scene of a crime that would shock the entire city. According to a police report compiled from Daniel's testimony and evidence, the events began to unfold around noon. Linda suggested that Daniel go to a cottage in Wisconsin for the weekend, as they had done in the past. She talked about future plans, mentioning that they could live alone, away from everyone. Daniel, who had been struggling with guilt and fear for months, responded coldly. He said, in his interview later, that he felt he couldn't take it anymore. The conversation escalated into an argument, the first in their secret relationship. Linda, according to Daniel, insisted that he acknowledge his feelings and accused him of being ungrateful. By 2 p.m., the argument had died down and Linda had gone into the living room to watch television. Daniel remained in the kitchen. According to his testimony, he was sitting at the table, looking at the knife Linda had used to cut fruit that morning. At that moment, he later said, his mind was all over the place. He recalled months of pressure, shame, and fear that their secret would be revealed. Daniel picked up the knife and headed into the living room. Linda was sitting on the couch with her back to him and did not notice him enter. Around 2:30 p.m., according to the medical examiner's report, Daniel stabbed Linda 7 times in the neck and chest. The attack was sudden, and Linda did not have time to resist. The examination showed that death occurred within minutes from massive blood loss. Daniel, according to him, then sat on the floor next to the body and remained there for about an hour, without moving. He did not try to escape or hide the evidence of the crime. At approximately 4 p.m., Marge's neighbor Kelly noticed that the Miller's home was unusually quiet. She decided to go in to check on the situation, as she knew Linda usually left the door open. Upon entering the living room, Marge discovered Linda's body and Daniel sitting next to her. She immediately called the police. Officers arrived at 4:20 p.m. and found Daniel in a state of shock. He did not resist arrest and confessed to killing his mother on the spot. A knife, covered in blood, was lying on the floor next to the couch. The crime scene investigation turned up several clues. Linda's blood was found only in the living room, indicating that the attack had occurred suddenly. There were no signs of a struggle on the body, and Linda's clothes were untouched. Police also found Linda's journal in the house, in which she detailed her feelings for Daniel, and his laptop with a search history that included queries about incest laws. These findings later became key to the investigation. Robert Miller, Daniel's father, was notified of the incident that evening. He immediately flew from Texas to Minnesota. According to police, he was shocked and unaware of his wife and son's secret relationship. Neighbors gathered outside the house to discuss the tragedy, but no one could believe that the quiet teenager they knew was capable of such a thing. What had begun as an ordinary day ended in an event that would change the lives of the Miller family and all of Maplewood forever. The evening of August 15, 2018, in Maplewood, Minnesota, marked the beginning of a police investigation at the Miller home on Lakeview Road. After neighbor Marge Kelly discovered Linda Miller's body and called the police, officers from the Maplewood Police Department arrived on the scene. Daniel Miller, 18, the victim's son, was found next to the body and immediately confessed to the murder. However, the circumstances of the case were so unusual that police began an in-depth investigation to establish a motive and a full picture of the events. Officers arrived at the scene at 4:20 p.m. to find the crime scene. Linda Miller, 42, was lying on a sofa in the living room with multiple stab wounds. A medical examiner who examined the body at the scene confirmed that she had died from blood loss between 2:30 p.m. and 3 p.m. A knife found nearby was identified as the murder weapon. Daniel, who was in a state of shock, made no attempt to deny his guilt. His hands and clothes were covered in blood, consistent with his confession. He was arrested and taken to the station for questioning. During the first interview, which began at 6 p.m., Daniel gave a detailed account of the day's events. He said he killed his mother after an argument over her suggestion that they go away together. When asked about the motive, he cited their wrong relationship that had begun months earlier. The detectives interviewing him were stunned but neutral. Daniel spoke haltingly, often trailing off, and claimed he couldn't live with it anymore. His words were the first hint of an unusual motive for the crime. A search of the house revealed key evidence. Linda's diary, found in her bedroom, contained entries about her feelings for Daniel dating back to December 2017. In them, she described her son as the only one, suggesting an unhealthy emotional dependency. On Daniel's laptop, police found a search history that included searches for incest issues and mental health, supporting Daniel's account of his awareness of the illicit nature of their relationship and his search for a way out. Police interviewed neighbors and family friends. Marge Kelly described an odd closeness she had noticed between Linda and Daniel in recent months. Linda's co-workers at the insurance company reported that she had become withdrawn and was taking frequent days off. Daniel's friend Ethan Pierce confirmed that he had been distant and had mentioned problems at home. School psychologist Dr. Allison Brown provided notes of meetings with Daniel in which he complained of anxiety. All of this evidence added up to a picture of psychological pressure that Daniel was experiencing. Robert Miller, Daniel's father, flew to Maplewood on August 16th and was questioned. He claimed that he was unaware of any problems in the family, as he spent most of his time traveling for business. Bank statements provided by Robert showed that Linda had spent large sums of money on trips and gifts for Daniel, which he considered normal care for his son. Robert was shocked to learn of the affair between his wife and son, and refused to believe it until he was presented with evidence. By August 20th, police had gathered enough evidence to charge Daniel with second-degree murder. The prosecutor, reviewing the case, noted that the motive for the crime, psychological pressure and awareness of the immorality of the relationship, would be key in court. The Millers' case attracted local media attention, but police tried to limit the leakage of information to protect the family's privacy. The investigation revealed how hidden family problems led to tragedy, leaving Maplewood in shock. The tragedy that unfolded at the Miller home on Lakeview Road in Maplewood, Minnesota, on August 15, 2018, left a deep mark on the small town. The murder of Linda Miller by her 18-year-old son, Daniel, was not only a shocking event, but also a source of reflection on hidden family issues, psychological pressure, and the consequences of keeping difficult situations quiet. The investigation that led to Daniel's indictment revealed a complex web of factors that led to the disaster. Daniel's trial began in March 2019. Prosecutors charged him with second-degree murder, arguing that the crime was committed under extreme emotional stress. Daniel's lawyers argued for a lighter sentence, citing his psychological state and pressure from Linda. A psychiatric evaluation conducted before the trial showed that Daniel suffered from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder caused by their relationship. The judge, after reviewing evidence including Linda's diary and witness statements, sentenced Daniel to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years, subject to psychological rehabilitation. Robert Miller, Daniel's father, sold the house on Lakeview Road after the tragedy and moved to another state. In an interview with a local newspaper, he admitted that he blamed himself for the absence of his family in his life, but he could not forgive Linda for her actions. He severed all ties with Maplewood, trying to start a new life. Neighbors, shocked by what happened, discussed at length how they could not have noticed the signs of trouble in a family that seemed so well off. Maplewood as a community has also changed. Local schools have begun holding workshops for parents and teens about the importance of open communication and seeking help. School psychologist Dr. Allison Brown has launched a program to support students facing family issues. The city has committed funds to expand access to free counseling for residents, recognizing that the tragedy could have been prevented if Daniel had gotten help sooner. The Miller case raised questions about the boundaries of family relationships and the impact of emotional dependency. Psychologists who commented on the case in the media noted that Linda likely suffered from an undiagnosed personality disorder, which manifested itself in her unhealthy attachment to her son. Daniel, in turn, was a victim of circumstances, unable to escape his mother's influence. Experts emphasize that such cases are rare, but require special attention, as their consequences are devastating. For Maplewood residents, the Miller's story was a reminder that serious problems could lurk behind the facade of a perfect life. Many began to pay closer attention to their neighbors, trying to spot signs of trouble. Marge Kelly, who first discovered Linda's body, later organized a local support group where people could share their experiences. She said she felt responsible for not intervening sooner, even though she acknowledged that she didn't know the whole truth. The tragedy at the Miller home left more questions than answers. It showed how a lack of communication, hushing up problems, and unresolved emotional conflicts can lead to irreversible consequences. Linda and Daniel's story became a lesson for Maplewood, reminding us that even the quietest suburbs can hide secrets that require attention and care.